to click, and I'll be your moderator. I am so glad to welcome Rebecca Tolley and Wendy Doucette, who will be presenting Reshape Your Organizational Culture with a Holistic Action-Based Framework. But before we get started, I do need to go over just a few logistical items. So number one, this session is being recorded. Second, please use the Q&A feature for any presentation questions. So you can choose to do this anonymously if you prefer. And we're aiming for about 10 minutes of Q&A at the end of the presentation. So Q&A function for presentation questions, and then use chat for general comments or technical issues. So Nicole Thomas is with us today, and she'll be monitoring the chat for any questions and comments. She'll also be adding some links to the chat. One is for the collaborative resource sharing. So if you think of a related reading, podcast, video, or something else, please share it with us in Calm's recommended reading resources document or in the chat. Due to the Google Docs limitations, we ask that you close out of the document after you have added a resource. And then one of our volunteers will drop the information in the chat. Following that, the next link will be our conference code of conduct. So that will be appearing in the chat as well. All right, so now I'm going to briefly introduce our presenters, and then I will turn things over to them. So first we have Rebecca Tolley, who is a professor and interim director of research and instruction services at East Tennessee State University's Charles C. Sherrod Library. Her book, A Trauma-Informed Approach to Library Services, was published in 2020 by ALA Editions. She presents on this topic and others, including civility, empathy, emotional labor, and the ethics of care. Wendy Doucette is an associate professor and the graduate research and instruction librarian at East Tennessee State University. She's written about personal storytelling in academic libraries, burnout, civility, motivation, and empathy. She's been a practitioner and teacher of applied Japanese philosophy for 3 decades. Welcome, Rebecca and Wendy, and take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Rebecca, and I'll be speaking to everyone first, and then Wendy and I will trade back and forth a little bit. We want to do our land acknowledgement. ETSU sits on the ancestral homeland of the Cherokee people of the Eastern Band. So talking about today, we'll give you strategies for being present and grounded, keeping a neutral perspective, and most of all, remaining balanced in your work life and home life. Our strategies are individually adopted and require little training or expense. We hope that after today, you may experience renewed motivation, more calmness, and feel less reactive when work events tip you off balance and leave you ruminating over worst case scenarios as you lie awake with insomnia. We believe that organizations can change for the better when transformational leadership is modeled. Wendy and I have collaborated over the years and have shared elements of trauma-informed care and constructive living with each other. Our syncretism in this presentation and our suggestions stem from our positionality in these approaches and our desire to make them relevant to each other. The basics of these 2 approaches are contained within these primary texts. In 2020, ALA Editions published a book I wrote, A Trauma-Informed Approach to Library Services, and Constructive Living by D.K. Reynolds was published in 1984 by the University of Hawaii Press. If people are familiar with one or both of these concepts, you may wonder how we are aligning them. They share several characteristics which we've listed on this slide. What is trauma-informed care, or what is trauma-responsive care? TIC, as it's generally known, encompasses practices that promote a culture of safety, empowerment, and healing. It also assumes that most individuals have a history of trauma, which has rewired their bodies and brains so that they may exhibit a range of behavior as they cope or try to self-regulate. Bessel van der Kolk extensively covers this in his classic, The Body Keeps Score, and I've included this and other works that I'll reference at the end in a list of references. Many human services and health services agencies use the TIC framework to meet their clients where they are and provide empathetic, caring services and support. The more I learned about TIC, the more I felt like it offered a solution to so many library organizational culture issues and behaviors. There are other librarians presenting on this topic at Calm today, so I'll touch on the very basics so you can see how Wendy and I got from A to B to C. But first, let me say a few things about trauma. TIC has its origins in the 1990s, but post-traumatic stress disorder and soldier's heart from the 19th century and shell shock from World War I all describe the mental health effects of experiences of big trauma. PTSD entered the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of the APA, American Psychological Association, in 1980, with an influx of Vietnam veterans seeking help, but feminist activists and therapists working with survivors of intimate partner and sexual violence pointed out decades-long observations that victims of domestic abuse displayed PTSD as well. Little trauma exists as well due to repeated exposure, and the little trauma being repeated adds up to chronic stress. These are the 6 pillars of TIC. I share them today so that you understand how these 6 concepts and the 4 on the following slide provide a jumping off point for the importance of care ethics. These 10 items are concepts, but they don't necessarily include strategies or tactics for creating these frameworks within an organization. My book offers examples, but there are multiple ways, for example, to create safety in library workplaces. For our purposes today, 2 pillars directly relate to our suggestions: peer support and mutual help, and empowerment, voice, and choice. It's not until we get to the 4 R's of TIC that care ethics enters the picture. These items prevent a checklist of sorts about what a TIC or trauma responsive library feels like. First, everyone realizes how trauma affects the communities we serve, as well as ourselves and our coworkers. Second, trauma informed or trauma responsive libraries recognize the signs of trauma. So when someone has a panic attack or withdrawals or is completely silent, we can understand that as a response. Third, we act by creating responsive systems. And lastly, we resist re-traumatization. Burnout and low resilience may occur with trauma, vicarious trauma, and compassion fatigue, but burnout happens over time and can be remedied with time off for a new job, whereas vicarious traumatization is tension and preoccupation with our patron stories and experiences. Re-traumatization occurs when people with PTSD relive stress reactions from the past with a new event. One example I give in my book is from Push Out, the criminalization of Black girls in schools. The authors describe a Black girl who is re-traumatized each time she encounters older white women because they triggered her past traumatic experiences. Older white women accurately describes librarians. Vicarious trauma happens when we work with people and we hear details of their trauma stories and may experience the pain, fear, and terror survivors endured because of our capacity for empathy. So compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma are synonymous and are associated with the cost of caring for others. We resist these items on the previous slide with care ethics, which include mutual support, one of the 6 pillars, self-care, and collective care. Mutual or peer support is provided by an equal and is someone who has similar experiences and can offer emotional support, advice, mentoring, and refer you to others who can help. Being non-judgmental, empathetic, respectful, and reciprocal are important aspects of providing peer support. Research shows that if a worker has one person they call a friend at work, then their workplace is tolerable. If workers have zero friends, then the notion of peer support is out of their reach internally. But there are many options for peer support outside of your specific workplace, like the National Alliance on Mental Illness and their support groups, for one. Giving and receiving peer support, practicing self-care, and benefiting from collective care builds resilience, helps us counter compassion fatigue, and lessens the effects of re-traumatization. So consider how you self-regulate, what works for you when you're exhausted from emotional labor or completely dead at the end of the day by too much change, techno stress, or a very fast work pace. How do you control your behavior, emotions, and thoughts? Managing disruptive emotions and impulses takes practice and thought. The main way we learned to self-regulate was by watching our parents and other family members navigate situations at home. And sometimes those may not be the healthiest behaviors to model, especially if adults were safe at home. They might not have modeled behaviors in what we would consider a professional manner. Corporations and individuals may promote self-care for nefarious reasons. Some are criticized for their glib and performative adoption of resilience and self-care as terms to bolster employee morale about the workplace without addressing real problems like white supremacy, sexism, homophobia, ableism, and other systemic work abuses. It's a sleight of hand manipulation that tells us that it's our responsibility to deal with our fragile, sensitive selves rather than a very real problem plaguing most workplaces today, which requires ownership and work to dismantle. At ETSU, I teach a 3-credit hour course called Intro to Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, in which I learn and collaborate with undergraduate students. My trans students introduced me to Hill Malatino's Trans Care, in which he writes about the ways that care labor and care ethics have heretofore been thought, arguing that dominant modes of conceiving and critiquing the politics and distribution of care entrench normative and cis-centric familial structures and gendered arrangements. Then his work led me to read the Care Manifesto by the Care Collective, in which the authors are reimagining the role of care in our everyday lives, making it a focal and organizing principle in every dimension and at every scale of life. They say that we are all dependent on each other, and only by nurturing these interdependencies can we cultivate a world in which each and every one of us not only lives but thrives. Naturally, I imagine that libraries are ripe for the type of care described by both of these authors, and that is why I suggested it as part of my 3-pronged approach to care ethics in libraries. How can you introduce care ethics into library workplaces? As a leader, you learn and grow in support of yourself and your direct reports. As you claim new values or have minor perspective shifts from professional development and education, you then model them in your immediate sphere of influence. For example, reading about care ethics, then advocating them by modeling new behaviors is responsive. It's trauma responsive because you're teaching by modeling new professional relating skills. Small changes make a big difference over time and are easier to sustain. So you can see that the reason this is important for the workplace is that sorry, I kind of lost track for a second. The reason why a trauma-informed, trauma-responsive, and care ethics are important for the workplace is when you look at the cost that trauma has on the American workforce, it's clear that we can do better. We can work to reduce trauma in childhood, which is also known as adverse childhood experiences. But we adult survivors of childhood trauma carry that baggage into our personal and professional lives. So these statistics are from the CDC, which say that 21 million people suffer depression. So the legacy of childhood trauma includes health issues. The health issues also affects workplace absenteeism to the tune of $246 billion a year. And another thing is that 61% of adults have at least one adverse childhood experience, and 16% have 4 or more. And so these numbers should be compelling to you for why this may be a useful framework for you to adopt. So I am turning it over to Wendy at this point, where she will talk about constructive living.
Thank you, Rebecca. Everyone, please just pardon me for a moment where I attempt to hide this thing. Well, I don't know how to hide this thing. Yes, I do. Okay. Constructive living is honestly one of my favorite things in the world. I'm so happy to have the opportunity to talk to you about it today. I came across it purely by chance about 30 years ago when it saved my life as the book that kept me from quitting grad school. And then it changed my life and has been the foundation of it ever since. Like trauma-informed care, constructive living is an action-based philosophy for reframing individual response to everyday situations. The core of CL is about working with your attention. And when I say that, it may sound a little like mindfulness. I am not discounting its effectiveness or value, but the current state of mindfulness is very troubling to me because it's become a commodity you can purchase. I will try to keep this as practically based and work-related as possible, but since not many people have heard of CL before, I do need to give you some context. Constructive living was created by Dr. David K. Reynolds in 1984. It's an Americanized philosophy about Japanese psychotherapy, which sits squarely in the tradition of Zen Buddhism. The Buddha named his philosophy the middle way, whose objective is to live in the midst of the world without suffering. And to do this, you place yourself within nature. That is the essence of the Tao, which predates Buddhism in Japan by over 1,000 years. In the context of the Tao and in Japanese culture, all things are interrelated in the source from which all things derive. The entire network is nature-based and it's all connected. The intrinsic value of Zen comes from the fact that it can't be bought or sold. Things simply are, and they have to be accepted as they are. Like everything else in the lineage, it's about the present moment as a new space in which new things are possible. So we have nature, balance, acceptance, and reality as cornerstones of a collective cooperative society. Here in the West, things are very different. Western medicine is founded on the scientific method of dissection and controls. Even if something has worked for hundreds or thousands of years, it has no value unless it can be measured and quantified. Now, we're all familiar with the body and its working parts from the point of view of Western medicine, in which the mind reigns supreme. You can see over on the right my very rough rendition of the human state in TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, where it's suspended in between and influenced by the qi of heaven and earth and its energy reservoirs, which are called dantians, cauldrons, which power the body. Now, unfortunately, in humans, qi tends to rise, and when we spend too much time thinking, it tends to get stuck there. Qi is supposed to stay low in the body or in the hands, where it can be useful to power the body or to move. In the center, we have the body-mind, mind and body being never separated in traditional Chinese medicine. Now, there's a lot of debate in the field of psychiatry currently about ethnocentrism and systemic racism, because the Western model remains the primary one taught in medical schools worldwide, so that even non-Western students are trained to value Western models over their own. Non-Western practitioners routinely read Western authors and not the reverse. And in this context, we often see indigenous used to mean traditional, but also as alternative, which may be used pejoratively as lesser. In the US, alternative medicine is generally not covered by insurance and thereby kept marginalized. Focusing on the past is a hallmark of depression in the same way that fear of the future sparks anxiety. A whole body focus on the present serves as a form of immersion therapy. So in that context, I want to show you the main theories which make up constructive living, and that primarily is Morita therapy. Marita therapy is a tiered, 4-stage, progressive, supervised, clinical, residential treatment of about 30 days for anxiety. Dr. Marita was the head of psychiatry at his hospital, a professor of psychiatry, co-founded the Japanese Society for Psychiatry and the Journal of Abnormal Psychiatry, studied in Vienna, deeply understood Freud, read existentialism, and composed calligraphy based on Nietzsche's poetry. A cosmopolitan individual by any standard, but because it's not Western, Marita therapy remains classified as an indigenous treatment, which, as you can see in the footnote, is Marita therapy works as well as anything that's currently available to treat depression today. Nikon has a very direct Buddhist link and evokes intense feelings of gratitude, connection, and a responsibility to contribute to society. Nikon is hardcore stuff, and it really changes people. Kaizen is not mentioned by Dr. Reynolds as a part of CL, but it is clearly part of the CL process, and I'm adding it here. Okay, that is a lot of context, but I hope that I've grounded you in this philosophy. And from this point on, we're talking only about work. And because this is still new and I want to help you out, I've brought a Zen master who you already know. I almost captioned him, but I'm sure you're already aware of Master Yoda's most famous Zen statement, do or do not, there is no try. So can you force balance? Isn't it all supposed to be organic? Sure, but you can get it in motion through the catalyst of behaving in a balanced way. You focus in small increments at first at doing only one thing at a time. I know that sounds revolutionary, doing only one thing at a time. You moderate your activities to attend to your needs. My friends, you will be dead someday. If you want a balanced life, you need to start having one now. Don't even decide about it. There is no try. Take action now to have one. So let's take a look at real life. For most of us, this does unfortunately look like a pretty typical day. So we start out on this nice flat line, and very quickly, here's the first problem of the day. Might have equalized, but then I had to check mail because it felt like it was a while, and suddenly it was 45 minutes later. I might have gone up into the flow, but it doesn't matter because something else happened that took me down. And again, I don't know what might have happened here because I got caught up in a discussion. Maybe I'm even the one who initiated it. That completely could have been. I might have tried to get started to work again, or I might have given up because I knew I was going to a long meeting that had lots of brand new notes about stuff. And at the end of the day, although I was here in residence for the entire day, did I actually finish even one thing today? Sometimes it feels like no. Now, one of the unintended things that's happening here, all day I have been bombarded with ideas and plans, and now the day is over, and I should be flatlining on this, but I'm heading out the door with my head full of possibilities. And if you're like me and you don't sleep well, you may be up at 3 a.m. thinking about these things. So here we are, back on the other end of the scale, coming in having thought about work when I was home. Now, this is an academic conference, and we all know that academic jobs spill over boundaries and go on past normal work times, but this is truly ridiculous. So if I need to achieve balance, I need to do two things. As with COVID, I need to work to flatten the curve, and I need to contain this. So my two goals are balance and containment. One way I can start to do this is to work during work hours. Now, I know that the schedule that's laid out here is not everyone's work schedule, and it may not even be anyone's work schedule. You probably work weekends, and so do I. But broadly speaking, there have to be times when you do work. And therefore, there have to be times when you don't work. That can be a really hard line to reestablish. And it doesn't mean that you care about your job less, only that you've put it into perspective, you've balanced it in proportion to the rest of your life. And then when you do it, you can focus on it. So if you look down the line every single day, we've got work stuff that needs doing right now. Happily, lunchtime is blocked off with needs because yes, we do still need to continue to take care of our physical selves, and whatever day we designate as the weekend, not work stuff that needs doing, like the laundry, plus fun. I'm not in any way advocating for a fun-free life. Okay, so CL has two primary rules. For this first one, it is so distressing to me that when we think about recruiting new coworkers, we always ask them the same interview question. How are you at multitasking? Which really means, are you willing to fracture your attention repeatedly all day, every day, until you've almost lost the power of concentration? Because that's what it takes to work here. If you're asking if I have the ability to work on a multitude of projects, the answer is yes. At the same time, no. When you allocate a certain amount of uninterrupted time to work, you make progress without stretch, which leads to accomplishment and maybe even the flow state that we have all heard so much about and would genuinely like to attain. Second thing in CL is no drama. The reality of accepting things as they are means that we don't know anyone else's motivation for anything. And staying in the present eliminates wasting time on future imaginary dialogues. So when you're in the shower thinking about what you're going to say to Susan the next time there's just none of that. Not only does dialogue with other people slow down, the never-ending dialogue in your head does too. And what we experience are moments of peace. Okay, now I am haunted by all these gray balloons at the bottom, and so are you. That's what modern life looks like. In response, CL has one major question. What needs doing now? Focus on one thing and do only that one thing in moderation, of course. You will still have meetings, you'll still talk to people, but many things can be controlled. We have the capability of instant communication, and sometimes that's great. Sometimes it's disruptive. If you block off times or days to work on certain projects, that consistency will benefit you as it becomes habit and a routine to your coworkers who know when you tend to be available. Everybody benefits. And on the plus side, what needs doing now is eventually in the course of the day going to be not work anymore, something besides work. Maybe what needs doing now is a nap. You know, there's a lot of things in life, and we want to be at the point where we can genuinely enjoy all of them. So how I use CL at work is in two ways. Outwardly, I teach it to students as an effective coping and planning mechanism. I am the graduate research and instruction librarian, and if anybody is walking a thin line of trying to hold on to their sanity, it's graduate students. I also bring a CL perspective to projects and meetings, and because I live CL, I'm a good role model of CL behavior. Inwardly, I use it as the foundation of my life to preserve my own sanity. Okay, so at this point, anything worth cultivating takes practice. You can apply the principles of TIC and CL, and they will shift your life. And unless you tell people about it, only you will know. Complete privacy in modern times, is that even possible? Yes, it totally is. However, praxis is where the transformational leadership piece comes in. This is where you talk the talk so people understand what's motivating you and how you see the world. When you walk the walk, you behave in accordance with those principles. Okay, so I'm going to shift back to Rebecca, and we're going to tag team our way through the end of this.
So our recommendations for success as a library leader, manager, supervisor is model what you believe in. Genuinely indicate that leadership supports change. I'm a middle manager, so I have control over my area and my team. I don't really have control, but at least at my level, at the team level, I demonstrate these principles of trauma-informed care and CL. So actively share your struggles and concerns, actively listen to others' experiences and concerns, work by milestones, not decrees, and value individuality in all forms. Create a supportive space. As leaders, creating supportive emotional space for our direct reports is our responsibility. Adopting constructive living principles, sharing their principles by direct education, and by modeling those techniques create a supportive space. However, creating physically accessible spaces can help as well. Many academic librarians have meditation and prayer spaces. We suggest a tech-free space or sensory room where people have tangible tools for self-regulation, where they can spend time in case the outdoors is inaccessible due to mobility or extreme weather conditions. Um, CL places an emphasis on nature and enjoying the outdoors, observing the outdoors and changes to the outdoors. Of course, spaces with windows can be essential for self-regulation. Bringing the outdoors inside by placing plants in library spaces has health benefits, as I explain in my article, Leaf of Faith, creating positive, productive library spaces with plants. The Japanese practice of Shinrin Yoku or forest bathing lines up with all of these things that we've talked about today. Diana Beersford Kroger says that conifers emit chemicals that calm and relax humans. So there are benefits to forest bathing that you can experience in your workplace or workspace by using conifer essential oils in a diffuser. If you cannot get outside or live in an urban environment where you don't have access to conifers. So we created this funnel to visualize a process in which you can plan to pilot our suggestions in your library. So assess the library culture, acknowledge where there are problems and gaps, incorporate a trauma-informed care framework or lens, focus on what needs doing now. What is the low-hanging fruit that you can hopefully change simply and quickly so that you can feel those changes. Space, dedicate time to space. And then the foundational core is this balance that we all need and desire in our professional lives and personal lives. And I'm turning it back over to Wendy now.
This is a post-pandemic possibility to think about how things could be different, because let's be honest, things are different now. So if we're thinking about shifting, the first thing that makes sense is to start with the climate survey. Are the services we provide as humanized as possible to the people who are receiving them and the people who are delivering them? Are we an actively supportive workplace, again, to our stakeholders and to each other? What are we doing that works that we need to hold on to? What are some other things that we could incorporate, or how could we shift the way that we're currently doing things now? In terms of values, are we embodying our core values? Are we even clear on what they are? Have we articulated them? Have they changed? Do we need to make allowances or again shift? And are we allowing others to embody theirs? And are we respecting those choices? The core of this whole thing is relationships. How do we treat each other as coworkers? The channels through which we communicate. We might, for example, be using chat because it's so immediate, and chat might be fantastic in some instances. To live on chat the entire time and to be responsive to the little ding the entire time, that may be having some repercussions for attention, focus, concentration, deep work. So where can we strike a balance in this point? This one is extremely dear to my heart. Are our organizations organic and responsive to the specific needs of our institution? I like my institution very much. However, it has the bad tendency to look far on the horizon to see if anybody is doing something somewhere else. And if they are, great, let's just do that here too. Everything that we're doing in our libraries needs to be the right thing for the right place at the right time. So it does need to be organic to our own needs, whatever those are. It's not bad to start with an idea from somewhere else, but it's always necessary to dissect it and see which of those pieces are going to work and which pieces are going to work for us if we did them differently. In terms of timeline, when could we roll out these pilots? And really, they're just all pilots, just talking about shifting. It's not a commitment, we're just talking. So that we can get the greatest number of people on board with the minimal amount of disruption. And this one, which you will notice, is not called assessment. It's called reflective analysis. I do not like assessment because it just sounds like constant work, but I will gladly sit down and think about stuff if you ask me to. Like everything in life, our process is ongoing. It's going to shift. It needs to shift. So what has shifted, what needs to, this may be something that you wind up writing down. You might document it, but it absolutely needs to be something that people have gotten together to talk about, to have the postmortem on this thing. You know, we decided to do it. How did it turn out? Where do we think we need to go next? We have so many options for doing this, so many possibilities for what you might do. But whatever you choose, again, make sure it makes sense for you and your people. Everything on this page is just words. What's important is giving people a chance to talk and be heard in a way that you think they will be receptive to, and also, dare I say, enjoy. Possible rollout times. I mean, I don't have to tell you how academic libraries work. We've got some good time in January. You might want to harness spring break. May, the summer. Yes. The thing is, you'll never get everybody at any time. People will be on vacation, stuff will be happening. But as an instruction librarian, I'm going to put out the not so subliminal message to please try to leave fall semester alone. There is sometimes time in December, but sometimes people who aren't teaching forget what the teaching year is like, and fall is generally difficult for everyone. Okay, and then some objectives and cautions. It's absolutely fine to design as you go. There's no need to rigorously pre-engineer something. And in fact, when you do that, you sometimes feel bound to stick to the plan, even if the plan isn't working or the people involved might have wanted something more flexible or maybe something entirely different. It's much more valuable and long-term more effective to have grassroots buy-in versus a top-down mandate. What we're looking for is a coalition of the willing. Please also remember to respect where people are. Everybody might not be on board with the latest and greatest as of today, but if you give people time and space and opportunity to change their minds and shift their perspectives, often they will. That's why it's important to focus education and discussion at the points of need, wherever they happen to be today. So what we're looking for is to create a reflective, shared learning experience for all that harmed no one and hopefully benefited many. And when it comes time for assessment again, please think about looking for reality-based progress. So not really a lot of highfalutin words, but actual stuff that made a difference to people. And the last one, avoid the illusion of inclusion. Nothing is more irritating than being asked what you think. What's your opinion? What do you think we should do? Oh, help us with this plan. Okay. And then none of it gets incorporated. If you're not going to actually take input from people, it's much more respectful to just not have asked them in the first place than to have wasted their time. Okay, so some additional resources. These are ours. This session today is a shorty version of an article that we have coming out in Academic Librarian Burnout Causes and Responses that is awaiting publication. Rebecca and I also wrote a very long article a couple of years ago about civility in the form of mindful speech. And that really was empathy based, and it really talked more about mindfulness, Buddhist right speech, a lot of principles that we did not get to today. Here are some references for CL, some of the things that I alluded to. If you were looking for where did I get that information, it was here. Rebecca has added some resources for trauma-informed care. We want to thank you very much. And before we get to the questions, I did want to take a moment to just, these are the first slides that we've ever given that had a feminine energy to them, and that included the color pink, because, conferences are professional, they're manly stuff, they should be blue. But in this case, we went with pink because this is all about caring and empathy. And we felt that this was a conference that was adult enough and cool enough that it could probably handle it. Okay, thank you. We're done and we're ready for questions.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much for that, Rebecca and Wendy. So we have a few questions here in the Q&A. Let's start with this one from Isabella. How do you protect these multitasking boundaries from interruptions from your colleagues / boss. For example, I've been interrupted 4 times during this presentation alone. I don't have a private office, so I can't close the door.
Wow. Okay. I will take a stab at that one. And I know Rebecca has some tactics too. We are both fortunate enough to have private offices, so that does help absolutely very much. One of the other things that we have is in our annual reports, we spec out what percentage of what we spend on what. So for example, academic assignment is this much, committee work is this much, research and scholarship is this much. And under that line of research and scholarship, if, for example, 20% of my job is meant to be dedicated to that, then 20% of my work week has to allow me the opportunity to do research and scholarship. So what that amounts to is I have 1 day a week that's designated as research day. And on research day, you can't get me. I am not available on my calendar. I have things that I need to do, and I will do them. Now, sometimes I will wind up having to still do something on a Saturday, but I really try, in the name of restoring my work-life balance and preserving my husband, who I love very much. I need to see sometimes that I just can't always be at work. That's my personal problem, is that I have taken work home with me for so long that I've had to work really hard to make a hard cut line. That work really doesn't get to cross through the door anymore, except for exceptional circumstances. So Rebecca, what do you try to do at work?
The only thing that I would recommend, since you don't have a private office, is I know that some people will wear headphones or have other visual indicators that they cannot be interrupted. That would be one, since you don't have a physical door to close.
Yeah. Another thing is I really don't care about social media at all. Although I live on YouTube, there's really nobody tweeting anything in the world that I honestly want to know about. So that is saving me some time right there. And I think because I'm not really on social media, it's much easier for me to have the mindset that not everybody needs me all the time right now. So for example, if I'm already at work and I'm in the building, if you desperately needed me, you could knock on my door. And that means that I can turn my mail off for an hour or two. If I'm really embroiled in something, I can still be reached. And I have no qualms about that, whatever.
Excellent, thank you. And Michelle made a comment in the Q&A too, that it might be appropriate to ask for an accommodation in a situation like this. Is there an empty office, a conference room you can sit in for some privacy, or can you work from home during the conference? So there's a suggestion specifically to this special circumstance of being involved in a professional development event this week. All right, next question. A little bit of context. Many of us are introverts and benefit from pre-walking through possible outcomes / conversations, so we have them in the shower, on the commute, etc. We don't respond well on the fly without that pre-thinking, so that's a trade-off I've come to terms with in my official non-work hours. However, your comments are excellent, keeping the work stuff in work time. Any advice on how to reconcile this?
One of the recommendations that I have, and I do the same thing, is if you have a peer support group, if you have one internally in your library, 2 or 3 people who get together, is that you can practice some role play, as far as if you're and spend your time in peer support groups working on those sorts of things, and try to focus them there instead of in the shower, although I think the shower is a great place for epiphany. But I think that, like, the role playing with practicing how am I going to preserve my work boundaries, or not my work boundaries, my home life boundaries, how to say no, how to respond verbally or via email, that if you can kind of bring it to your peer support group, that is one way to focus on it at work and maybe not so much at home.
And I agree. I would never give up the shower as a space for thinking. I think I've written probably every presentation I've ever had when I was washing my hair. I've certainly worked on them. What I don't do anymore in the shower is have imaginary fights with people. Because what CL does allow me to do is, I might be midstream having an imaginary fight with somebody who's irritated me about something, and I'll just open my eyes and say, they're not here, are they? No. So I am wasting my breath just fighting with this person. It's absolutely not meant to remove anything from your life that you enjoy. Absolutely not. But to get you to the point where you say, I am super irritated, but this will pass. That is the great lesson of Buddhism. And I'm by the way, I'm not a Buddhist. But the great lesson of Buddhism is that everything is transitory, everything is moving, everything will pass. So don't get so bent out of shape about this thing, and truly really work on enjoying your life, because time is passing too.
There's actually a follow-up in here on that question about reconciling reconciling those skills. So how do you apply the skills that you talked about today when asked to respond to things on the fly? How do these things go together?
Oh, well, that sort of exists outside of the TIC and CL framework. As librarians, we're used to being asked questions on the fly, and you just have to kind of roll with it. Fortunately, sometimes you get asked the same questions over and over, so you kind of can develop that spiel for here's how you find 8 peer-reviewed resources. But yeah, I think you can always answer, I haven't thought thoroughly about that question. Let me get back to you.
Yeah. That's one of the tips I give grad students all the time, is especially when they're getting ready for things like presentations, they're so afraid of the unanticipated question. And all you ever have to say is, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Exactly as Rebecca said, I'll get back to you. I am lucky because Rebecca is my next door neighbor at work, and she is a Southern lady, and Southern ladies are filled with aplomb. I am a Yankee. I'm very quick. So that's another thing I've used CL for, is to not be so reactive, to realize that in every moment you are not forced to open your mouth and say the same old thing you always would have said, or do the same old thing, that in this moment you could do something different. And even if that's waiting to take a pause or saying something that you would not have normally said, again, it's all the little Kaizen baby steps that will get you to a different place if you just do them consistently. And really, it does make a difference in your life, as with any type of practice, just doing it consistently.
Excellent, thank you. Next question, how might you foster this application to leaders as well? I'm noticing trauma-informed care being applied for colleagues and reports primarily.
Right. So yeah, that's a problem that I've experienced as far as being like a mid-management person. I really believe that the framework can change things, and so I haven't had success in trying to convey that, or to bring like deans or other stakeholders on board. And so I think there are a variety of reasons. And so I don't necessarily have a solution other than talk to these people about how it has changed your behavior, or changed your approach to the work or the workplace. For me, one of the things that I'm very invested in trauma-informed care, and one of the 6 pillars is addressing social, racial, gender issues, cultural issues, to repair past inequalities. And so I teach a course on trauma-informed librarianship for Library Juice, and I'm working with ALA Learning to produce some modules for them as well. And in the ones that I've done with Library Juice, we've talked very frankly about how could we deploy, trauma-informed care into our different library places. And it kind of varies, because some people say, yes, I think that my director or my dean would be really on board. And other people say, no, this is probably not a priority, because right now DEI is the most important thing that we're facing. So I think you have to make a case for it, its importance, and be able to show some examples of how these principles can change. I would, find stories of successes. And there are lots of stories, successful stories of trauma-informed care in K through 12 and, hospitals and other settings.
Oh, and Rebecca, we have a clarification here as well. So the question asker was saying that they meant that leaders are using it, but it's not applied to them. So a lack of empathy and compassion towards leadership. So how might we foster it in applying to those in leadership?
Can you reread that for me, please?
Sure.
I'm not sure I understand.
And also, Danny Cook, I'm getting a notification that you would like to answer this question live. So do you have something to say? No, okay, that was just happening when you clicked on it. Okay.
Yep, just trying to move them along.
Okay, all right. So following up on the leader questions, I meant that leaders are using it, meaning trauma-informed care, but it is not applied to them. I see a lack of empathy and compassion. How might we foster it applying to those in leadership? The burnout is real. Many leaders asking if the squeeze is worth the juice.
Right. That's a good question. I sometimes think there is just a real disconnect, just from my personal experience. Sometimes directors and deans are so far removed. They have so many layers between themselves and, people working on the front lines, that they do lack empathy, or they haven't, I guess you could say, walked in people's shoes. It's been a long time since they've been, doing the basics of library work. And so they're very disconnected. I would say, see if they're willing to come down and work the circulation desk for a couple hours and reconnect with what it feels like to be in that space, and what it feels like to have those kind of conversations and relationships with other people.
That is an interesting question. It's like how people universally say that they hate micromanagers. 100% of us hate micromanagers. Then how do micromanagers still exist? Wouldn't they have been bred out by now? And yet it's something that persists. So I think the whole thing about being a role model, being a genuine person, walking the walk, and I think also sharing your struggles is a big deal. Sharing them, in one direction and in the other, top down and bottom up, that we all have struggles. And I think bottom line, within the building, our struggles are quite similar. So I think that may be a way of getting past the hierarchy of who's at what level and what could we do, or even just being willing to listen to other people's strategies about what do you do? How do you handle this? Well, that's interesting. That is the sort of thing that makes a workplace, that level of just sharing and being able to talk to people.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions? Please pop them in the Q&A. Otherwise, the last one I have in here right now, Rebecca and Wendy, is a request to see the TIC reference slide again. So if you would click back to that. I'll give it just a moment to see if anything appears in the Q&A.
And the conference has not asked us this yet, but as soon as they do ask us, of course, we're going to put these slides up so that they'll be available for everyone.
Excellent, wonderful. All right, well, I see no more questions in the Q&A box. So thank you so much, Rebecca and Wendy, for answering these questions and for a fabulous presentation. It was such a pleasure to have you with us today. Before we close the session, I would like to point out that the evaluation survey that's available for you to complete, and I know that our presenters would really appreciate your feedback. You can find a link to the evaluation in Sched. It's labeled feedback survey and it's directly above the session description. So please take the time to provide that feedback. Thank you all for attending, and I hope you've enjoyed the presentation and the rest of the conference.